As a motorcycle guy, I take a lot of facts as a given. A lot of things that I learned throughout the years seem perfectly normal to me. It's like an American going to buy liquid eggs at the local Walmart. But as normal as that might seem, as weird it can look to the outside world, to the non-bikers out there, to people who haven't smelled the taste of freedom and cow shit on an alpine pass. So here are the 10 weirdest things about the motorcycling world.
Number 1. The car world has beautiful names like the Portofino, Sedici, Silvia, and many more.
Meanwhile, the bike world has more seductive names, like the Honda CBR 1000 RR-R SP, or the KTM 1290 Super Duke R Evo, or even the Italian Ducati Multistrada 1260 S Bike Speak.
The real differentiator here is that bikes are named and centered around the engine. You buy the power plant and then check out the rest of the package that comes along. The power unit is such a fundamental part of the experience of a motorcycle that almost all models have it in the name.
Meanwhile, for cars, if I want a BMW 3 Series, it can be a 316, 318, 320, 325, 330, 335, 330D, 320D, and so on. While with the bike naming examples given above, they all feature the cubic capacity of the engines. This can be really confusing when first getting into motorcycles, but pretty nice once you get used to it.
Second, not all cubic capacities are created equal. With a few exceptions, all engines are naturally aspirated. In a car, if you take a 2-liter 4-cylinder and a 2-liter 6-cylinder, they will make about the same amount of power. In a bike, sure, or not.
Take this, the BMW S1000RR. It features a 1-liter inline-4 engine putting out about 200 horsepower. So it would make sense for this almost 2.2-liter Harley V-twin to make about 300 or 400? No. In fact, it barely passes the halfway point with 121 horsepower.
Okay, so basically V2 engines don't make much power then, right? Well, about that.
Ducati managed to get 205 horsepower out of their 1300cc Panigale superbike, which is also a V2. You see, in motorcycles, the engine configurations are really different. You can't simply judge them by displacement or type. There are a lot of factors, and yeah, coming from a car guy, that's weird.
Third thing, in cars, you have legends like the Honda S2000 or Lexus LFA. They are known for breaking the 9000 RPM barrier, and they sound amazing. I mean, for a car.
Look, in a bike, 9000 RPM isn't really something to brag about. Even taking normal, cheap supersports like the Yamaha R6, you can get to 17,500 RPM. That's about 3 to 4 times the revs of a regular petrol car. And you can get that starting at $3,000 at your local corner drug dealer turned bike salesman guy. And that's without looking at rarer examples like this Kawasaki ZX R250R SP, which revs all the way to 20,000 RPMs. And what a glorious sound does it make on the way there.
Okay, so they rev high, they have interesting engines, so the modding scene must be crazy. Well, number 4 might disappoint, but tuning isn't that much of a thing here. You don't usually have forced induction, so easy horsepower isn't a thing. Yes, there are cams and other items you can put on a motorcycle to improve its power output, but it's really not much. And so with that, a lot of the modding scene in the two-wheel world is mostly around aesthetics and less on the performance side, at least when you compare it to the car scene. Number 5. So, you like bikes. You decide to go for a second-hand one and start looking on Craigslist. And you think you're in paradise because all bikes on there are under 100,000 miles. They're brand new.
Or they would be if they were cars. If a car is high mileage at, let's say, 150k, then a bike is considered the same at about 50k. Engines are more stressed on motorcycles, so as a rule of thumb, bikes do about 3 times less miles than a car. Of course, there are exceptions to everything, but in general, you will see that motorcycles are way less used, mostly because they're just a hobby for most and not a necessity. That's if you're in Europe or the US.
So, we know the quirks of bike engines, but what does it connect to? A gearbox. And here's one thing that's pretty darn weird.
On most bikes, but especially on the faster ones, gears are long. For a 1000cc Super Sport, it's not uncommon to reach speeds of up to 100 miles an hour in first gear. Yes, that's not a typo. These machines can get your license suspended in first gear on the highway. There is a reasonable-ish explanation for this. They are really light and so have a tendency to power wheelie at lower speeds, so that's why even with these long gears, they don't necessarily bog down. Now, not all motorcycles have this gearing, but a lot of them do, so I include it here.
Number 7 makes the whole gear shifting even weirder, and no, I'm not talking about the weird 1 neutral 2 3 4 pattern. That's common knowledge almost.
But I'm talking about the clutch, or to be more specific, how you don't necessarily need one to change gears. Once you're up and running, with the right technique, you can both downshift or upshift without needing to touch the clutch. Now, some haters might warn you that you will nuke your gearbox, yada yada. You're probably gonna be fine, but all this lies in your right wrist and actually relies on no electronics whatsoever.
Technically, in a car you could also do this, but it's much harder, and since all motorcycles have sequential transmissions, this basically makes sure that you can't hit neutral when going from, let's say, third to fourth. Number 8, technology, or the lack of it. Look, no matter how you take it, motorcycles look like actual dinosaurs. Heck, some of the bikes sold new today feature carburetors. When was the last time you saw that on a car? I don't think I'm even old enough to have been in one.
Well, let's take ABS for example. The Mercedes W116 first introduced it in the automotive world in 1978. When did you think the first bike came out with it? 10 years later, in 88. But that's not the most amazing thing. Because up until his last years, you could still buy brand new street bikes without ABS, and it was legal. And heck, some purists actually argued against it. I mean, bikers can be a little mad, but that's sort of like arguing against having wall protections for wall sockets because kids should learn on their own skin, or die, one of the two.
But if you think these dinosaurs are old, oh, we can do worse. What do you fill a car's tires with? Air, of course. Just that, right? A tire and air. Remember the days when you used to have an air tube inside of the car's tire? Me neither, because they stopped doing that in the 60s, almost 40 years before I was born.
Let's go back to two wheels, where actually tubes are preferred in some applications, like adventure riding. They do make some sense, because you can change them and hopefully save yourself from a flat in the middle of nowhere, but I think a lot of riders tend to over-glorify this technology that makes a black and white CRT TV look like the Starship Enterprise. If you come from the car world, I would not be surprised if you didn't even know that air tubes are a thing. But they are, don't worry. Bikes remind you of that.
Now, last but not least, you might have heard the old biker saying, when in doubt, guess it out.
Now this might seem like a phrase taken right out of a Marlboro commercial, where the helmetless protagonist jumps into a bar to save a lovely western princess, and then right in the sunset with a cigarette lit in his mouth just before finding out that the princess was his sister. But actually, there is some truth to this. In the real world, bikes can accelerate almost as fast as they can brake.
And what that means is that, for example, if a car runs a red light, you have two options on a bike. You can either try stopping or try accelerating out of it. Both of them are equally as effective.
So yeah, throttling out of sticky situations, that actually happens. And it's way more helpful than a car driver might think.
But this is it. This is my list of the top 10 weirdest things about motorcycles. This is an amazing hobby and it can be really serious at times, but it can provoke a lot of smiles per gallon.
But it's a good idea to sometimes stop taking ourselves so serious and have some fun. Shameless banter never killed no one, I think.
Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you liked it, just give it a like. You can leave a comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And see you next time. Have a good one.